Great. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining, and you're very welcome to this session. We have a very interesting session lined up for you today. So we are going to talk today about the WASH Climate Shift, the Country Implementation Guide, which we hope will be released by the end of the year. So I'll just go through our session. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the slides to move. Okay, sorry, let me just quickly fix this. So just to say that we are here today we have a great panel for you today. We have Richard from SIWI, we have Tom from SIWI, we have Aranita from UNICEF in Nepal, we have Dr. Kalist Tindi Mugaya, who is the Commissioner for Water Resources Planning and Regulation at the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. We have Wilberforce from UNICEF Uganda, and we have Jibril from WaterAid Burkina Faso. And to close today's session, we will be having Farai who is a UNICEF senior advisor in headquarters. So I'm having a little slight problem with trying to move the slides on the screen. So just bear with me a couple of minutes. Okay, so hopefully you can see the slides. Right, so we are going to start with an overview of why we feel that this country guide is so important and why we really need to make sure that WASH services are climate resilient. We'll just give you an overview of how we got here and what the climate shift is. And then I will hand over to Tom from SIWI to give an introduction to what the Country Implementation Guide is. And then we'll have some really great experiences from the UNICEF country office in Nepal on their experience of transitioning the climate shift to the WASH sector in Nepal. And then we will also have hear from Dr. Kalist and Wilberforce from Uganda on what their experience has been. And then we will have, we'll be listening to Jibril from Burkina Faso to talk about the experience of how they've really tried to integrate water resource management in Burkina Faso. We will have a quick Mentimeter, and then we'll be having a discussion with the panel, and we will be closing with some of these remarks. Sorry, okay, I think I'm having some issues with moving the slides. So sorry, I'm just not very patient. Okay, so why are we here? So the diagram that we're showing now is from a document that UNICEF released in 2018. And at the time, we felt it was fairly comprehensive to highlight the risks posed to children due to the climate change impacts on WASH services. And as you can see here, it impacts WASH services, but also the lives and the futures of children in terms of their education, their health, and their general development. But actually, since then, we've had an even more deeper understanding of how climate change is impacting WASH services and children. It's been very clear, there's an interruption to the power supplies in many of the services, in WASH services, which are dependent upon, for example, dam flow. There's often insufficient flow in wastewater networks to ensure that wastewater can be treated effectively. As water resources reduce, there's an increased cost, and that means that the price of water often increases, which affects the ability of people to pay and therefore the business model of water companies. There's then, of course, the increased abstraction costs due to lowering water levels and the associated treatment cost as there's an increase in the mineralization. And there's also limited reservoir storage capacity as there's a change in the volume of water and the frequency of rainfall. Then there's a limitation there. I come from a country where it rains almost every day, and the reservoirs have been designed to make sure that there's enough storage capacity. But when it hasn't rained, then that becomes a problem. And if it hasn't rained for 2 weeks, then there's a really sharp reduction in the levels in reservoirs. So that is a really sharp realization that the systems were dependent on a climate overview, which is no longer appropriate. And of course, as we've seen in many urban areas, there's a lot of stormwater, and that often gets mixed with wastewater, and then it overflows. We even saw that in Paris recently with the Olympics. So talking about the, sorry, I'm just still having problems with my slides. Okay, so why are we here? So basically, we started in UNICEF at a journey about 10 years ago, looking at how to transition our programs to be climate resilient. And we came up with the climate shift, which you'll see in a couple of minutes, to really try to help move the sector along and to give steps, because it really is overwhelming in terms of the amount of data and how do you actually design this and the costs associated. There's a lot of confusion and there's almost an overwhelming amount of information. But one thing that we've also found is that there's really a real kind of lack of evidence for us to be able to advocate for climate resilient wash services. We know about levels, and we'll hear from Burkina Faso in terms of the water levels lowering, but there's also we really need to be stronger in terms of the evidence of climate change on wash services and the impact on communities and their resilience. Certainly from the last couple of years, it's very clear that the wash sector doesn't really integrate with other sectors, including the agricultural sector, but also with climate. And for those of you who've been involved in developing some climate finance proposals, you'll know that there's also a special language that people talk. There is also the concept of the climate rationale and the additionality. Of course, the climate rationale is really just the linking of the risks associated with climate change, for example, on wash services, and possible solutions to mitigate those risks. And of course, the water sector has huge potential in terms of both mitigation and adaptation, but we haven't been so strong yet in terms of outlining that. And certainly there's a perception that if people don't have proper access to wash services, they are more vulnerable. But this is where the narrative in developing a climate finance proposal comes in, that we have to concentrate on the climate impacts and how to make this services climate resilient. Certainly, I find it fairly overwhelming in terms of where to start to design a climate resilient service. Where do you start to find the information? How do you actually design? How do you select the technology? What time period do you use? How and while also with that, how to make it more affordable. But there's a lot of opportunities, including in some of the CLTS and CAS programs that are being implemented, that you can look at really helping to integrate climate resilience and the demand for climate resilient services. And that brings me to the next point, that there really has been a limited demand for climate resilient wash services because the investment case has not been made strong enough. Linked to that also, of course, is limited engagement for the private sector. And what we have seen is that the wash sector often depends on earmarked funding for climate, only to implement climate funding. And if people don't get earmarked dedicated funding for climate, then often the services which are being even currently designed or included in proposals now are not climate resilient. And of course, it takes a really long time. And lastly, just to say that while in emergency and humanitarian contexts, we definitely need a very, very fast response. And of course, it is life-saving in the first couple of days, but that doesn't mean that we can't integrate climate risks and climate risk assessments into the design and the technology selection. So this is the 9 steps of the climate shift that I mentioned. We can put a link into the chat here to have this, but it's really just, we developed this, I think, in May 2020, and it's really just an outline of how to make wash services climate resilient. So where do you start? And you can do this at a national or a sub-national level. But it really just talks about the process, about how to understand what has been done, where are the gaps, and of course, climate finance is linked to the risks being clearly linked to a national priority to make sure that WASH and the risks posed by climate change are recognised as a national priority, and there's many NDC and NAP processes underway. And then there's the identification of solutions. Then there's looking at environmental and social impacts. Then there's integrating into work plans, national and or organization-wide work plans, climate finance, and then also importantly, and which is emerging over very, very quickly over the next year, is about how to define indicators to be able to measure the climate resilience and then to understand how effective those solutions are. I'll just quickly show this, but these are just some of the work that UNICEF has been doing with partners in terms of implementing the 9 steps. It really just highlights that a huge amount of progress can be made at national and sub-national levels. And even a lot of this can be done with capacity available in current organizations. You don't need to spend a huge amount of money to do many of these key steps, but even just starting, even looking at publicly available documents like existing climate finance proposals, the nationally determined contributions, and the NAPs can really give us a huge amount of information about what has been done. I'm just going to hand over to Tom from CIWI, who's going to outline why we're here with the country implementation guide. Tom, over to you.
Thanks. So my name is Tom Heath. I work with CIWI, spending time looking at how climate is relevant to WASH services. And so I wanted to start with this slide around, do we really need another guide? And I think why I put this up first is that we recognize it's not just about documentation. We're supporting a broader process. But what I wanted to do is outline what we're trying to do with this guide, and you can evaluate whether you think that's useful. So the first thing is we're really looking at the how, trying to make this concrete. There's so much information that is out there. What is it that country offices and programs have to do? We're trying to consolidate the flood of existing materials. We want to be your DJ. We want to show you what are the good resources, where can you get them, how do you digest what is already existing. Providing you, thirdly, with a brief, a high-level brief in terms of what are the key choices, what are your key actions, where are your points of attention, how do you navigate this climate space. It's structured around the 9 steps that Fiona briefly overviewed. And I think that one of the parts we're most excited about is we're going to be providing you examples from other contexts and case studies, looking at what were the challenges that they faced and how did they overcome them, trying to give you some tools to sort of unpack, what are some of the issues. And as Fiona mentioned, we're aiming for the end of the year. So if we go to the next slide, I put this slide up not to promote CIWI, but to say why we're doing this is because with CIWI, we've been supporting this process in 30 countries and looking at the shift. And I think what's interesting about that is that we're actually doing it. We're practitioners in looking at how do we shift the sector. And we wanted to capture and document that experience and that knowledge. And I think the second point from CIWI's perspective, one of the big things we're looking at is this question around governance. It's around shifting the sector. There are a lot of great tools, information around, but I think it's a question of prioritization within everything else that's going on in the country. So this is why CIWI has been working with UNICEF on that. So on the next slide, I was going to zoom in. Today, we're going to have some examples from case studies, but I just wanted to briefly touch on one. So we're in Nigeria, this image during an identification and appraising of solutions workshop. And 2 things here. One, during this workshop, we have one of the big issues is around coordination. It's all around coordination. So we have members of the Minister of Water and Sanitation. We have the Minister of Climate Change. We have representatives from the river basin authorities, civil society, and also some technical NGOs. And I think it's about what we have in the guide is, who are the people to consider, but also outside of the WASH sector, people you might not have considered, and how do you reach some of these people? What are some of the ongoing sort of coordination mechanisms in country? And secondly, you can see a chap holding up a photo, and in this, holding up a map, sorry. In this particular workshop, one of the things we did was go regional, looking at what are the specific climate risks for the different region of Nigeria using GIS. So in the guide, we explain how you could do this using GIS, but also how you could do it just using existing mapping and information that's available. So in the next slide, I wanted to sort of just show you some of the sort of specific content we'd be looking at. So within this, we're going to be looking at how can you evaluate how WASH is integrated within the policy environment, within the UNFCCC submissions, the NAPs, the NDCs. How do you work out How is this relevant? What are the questions you need to be asking? And how do you ensure that we're aligned and positioned as a sector to integrate WASH within these future submissions? Secondly, how do you select resources to characterize and score the main hazards? How do you unpack all of that climate science? And I think linked to this specifically around risk, is the question, will this area be 10% more, have more 10% more rainfall? What do I do with that? Is that question even relevant to me? How do I engage with this? So some of the points sort of around these questions of risk and understanding that and how you deal with uncertainty. And lastly, within the guide, we have points sort of exploring how to consider what are the different levels at the local level, at the institutional enabling level, what are the different pillars, the building blocks to consider when you're trying to identify solutions, exploring what is a climate risk and how do you engage with that in terms of moving it forward. So I think in the last couple of slides, I was just going to show a couple of screenshots around the approach. I mean, we're trying to, as I mentioned, be focused on the how. We're trying to make it concise. We're structured around these 9 steps. So kicking off with, the key information you need to know. What are the outcomes? What's the time? Who's involved? What's the objective? Then what is the rationale? Why? And trying to go beyond sort of the obvious, giving you the ability to be able to engage with stakeholders. And then a core aspect of what we're trying to do with this is setting it up in a way that you can navigate. So we have flowcharts moving through. Where are you in your country? Where are you in your context? What's the scale? So where do you need to go with? And then we have some classic tools on checklists and case studies, etc. And we might even be exploring, trying to explore particular messages with some cartoons, because I think the World Bank did some great job there. We want to continue that. So lastly, on the next slide, just a couple more images of sort of some of the meat. So we can see here a case study from Uganda. In this case, it was looking at the elaboration of the process used to update the NDC in Uganda. And on the second slide is a technical box outlook, which is we're looking in this case at how do you deal with uncertainty? What are the challenges when you're engaging with sort of different visuals and how that masks or hides uncertainty? And the table at the bottom is exploring, if you want to actually download and access climate information, what would be some of the default parameters that you would consider in doing that? So it's sort of just a snapshot of what we're doing, but it's really, this process is meant to be a documentation that we're using. We're also working on some climate trainings, some sort of materials to support this, and this being a reference to really help you navigate the climate space and find what you need to do. So I'm going to pass back to Fiona, who's going to take us through the next section. Thanks.
Great, thanks a million, Tom. And just to highlight that before we jump into the panel, that at the end we will have a Mentimeter, and it'd be really great to get your feedback on areas where you find are a challenge in this whole process. And just for me, one of the key reasons for having the country implementation guide is really just to make sure that we know where to look for the information, and as Tom mentioned, how to interpret that and what does it mean for WASH, because there's such a deluge of information. How does that transcend then into how we design and implement and importantly monitor a program? So just to say that you will have the opportunity at the end, and please feel free to add anything into the chat in any areas that you feel are really confusing about how to implement and design climate resilient WASH services, because it is really overwhelming. So as Tom mentioned, hopefully we're going to have this guide out by the end of the year, and we would always, of course, be looking forward to some inputs. And maybe just to add, in addition to it being a guide, we are looking at having this online, both in English and French. So bear with us. It's a huge amount of work has gone in so far, and thanks again to the CIWI team for helping us out on this. So we're going to start getting some discussions now, and I'm going to ask our colleague Aranita from our Nepal office, who has been working really closely with the government. And I think for me, the Nepal country team has been one of the most one of the really incredible teams that we have, who has really taken the climate shift and really accelerated. There's been a very strong base, of course, in Nepal, but I've been really impressed with how UNICEF and the government have worked together with other key stakeholders to make a number of things happen. So Aranita, I just thought I'd check if you're there. Hi, Aranita. Okay, I can see you're connected, but I think you're on mute. Okay, so maybe we can come back to Aranita. So maybe I can go to our team. Okay, so maybe I can go to our team for Uganda. I'm sorry. Oh, hi, sorry.
Hello.
Hi, Aranita.
Hi.
No
Thank you.
problem.
I think somebody had to unmute me
Oops.
from the host.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, first of all, great to hear your voice, Aranita.
Thank you.
And just to say that I think for me, the Nepal country team with the government have done an incredible job, and it'd be really great to maybe share your experience and that of the government of Nepal in how you have really helped us to helped the sector to really understand the risks posed by climate change onto the wash sector, and then what you have done about this. So maybe if I can just ask you a quick question. So Nepal has been really has made a huge amount to shift and to make the sector alert about the risks posed by climate change. But can you tell us, in terms of implementing the shift, what have your challenges been? If you could just let us know briefly, Aranita. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Fiona. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. As you know, Nepal is very prone to climate-induced disaster because of its geography, and recently we have been seeing a lot of changing climatic conditions. So over the years, I should say, to be very exact on the milestone, in 2015-16, we started off with some initiation on, because we were doing lots of every year responses, disaster responses, but
Sure.
we were not concerned about at the overview of what is happening, how it is happening, why it is happening, those questions. No, I think the question we started to systematically do was around 2016, when we started a government-led study around climate impact on wash services, because in reality, Nepal has impacts over 100+ water supply schemes every year. It's impacted by either flood or landslide or any flash floods, and recently big ones, renowned worldwide also. So over the years, it was very difficult initially for us to really convince government to go beyond business as usual, where we only looking at disaster response rather than looking beyond the risk factors, no? So recently, and then in the country level, beyond WASH also, the last 2011 NAP or NDC, we did not have any space on for WASH. In fact, water resources was prioritized, but WASH was never prioritized or given a very small space, negligible. Then I think in 2021-22, we made a major advocacy with the different evidences of disaster impacts that we had. We tried to consolidate those evidences and negotiate that WASH needs to be one of the key priority sector for NAP and NDC as a national priority project or national government commitment worldwide also. No? So I think taking that opportunity, we try to slowly engage the government and the sector players. It's not just government, but different sector players like the development partners, the NGOs, to really engage with us and the government to really look into the climate risk. So in 2021-22, we did the WASH risk assessment. I think that was one of the kickstart of our sector-wide understanding of the risk, or prioritizing the risk, I should say. And then in 2022-23, actually, we did the WASH BAT assessment, where over 100 multi-sector players, we came together. And with the support, technical support from CIWI, we were able to really identify and prioritize the risk for WASH, and then also identify key solutions. So I think that also led us to developing a climate rationale for WASH sector. And the most good side of that was immediately after this whole exercise, luckily the government was also moving towards a joint sector review, where we strongly advocated these all exercises to systematically prioritize the climate shift exercises that we were doing. So now those exercise has been like well spelled in the joint sector review. The climate sector, climate rational has been prioritized as one of the basis for the joint sector review and the recommendations. So I think that way, like we were systematically engaging government, non-government, and even the private sectors also to really prioritize that and also internalize the climate risk and its need for shifts on in WASH sector. No? So I think that is one of the major exercises we systematically do. But of course, it did take us about 2 to 3 years time, but I think it's a systematic way for us to really, for everybody to internalize and prioritize. So I think that's one of the major shifts that we're trying to move. And not only that, because at the country, what we're looking at is the WASH sector overall funding is shrinking. So because of this rationale, I think we are trying to negotiate, bring that justification that WASH needs to be investment, there needs to be an investment in WASH, but then additionally, the risk factors needs to be considered when we are looking at achieving SDG targets. No, so that is something negotiation that it brought us when we did this whole process. Thank you, Fiona.
This is brilliant, Arnita, and I think you've hit on a few points, and especially you've clarified the importance of and the realities, of course, of how you start and how you get people involved and the timeframes involved. But as you've said, it is an investment, and I think really the progress demonstrated by the Nepal WASH sector in terms of advocating for projects in the National Adaptation Plan has been really significant. But I think you also hit on a couple of key points. One is the investment case and how important that is to make people aware. And the second thing is really just advocacy based upon that, because it's not really there. And that's what I find has probably really struck me as being, we all know the problems, but trying to get that onto paper and to highlight the impact of not investing is really critical. And maybe, Arnita, I can just ask you another question. I mean, I know that Nepal and Uganda actually were the countries to request were the first countries to request training of trainers. But I was just curious, why did the WASH sector in Nepal feel that specific training on climate resilient WASH in the form of a training of trainers was so important? If you could just share a couple of those points, Arnita, that'd be great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Fiona. I think the training of trainers, how we see it is not just a training of trainers, but it's an opportunity to bring all the sector players, not just the government. At the government level, like I'll put my answers in two ways. One is if we are looking at the government at this point in time, because Nepal has just transitioned from democratic to federal structures of 3 layers. So we now have 753 municipalities, 7 provinces, and 1 federal government. And currently, what we're doing is we are supporting the federal government till the local government to develop the WASH plans. Because ultimately, like now, the local government is fully accountable and responsible for implementing development agendas. So in this process, what we're seeing is over the couple of years, what we're seeing is we are making WASH plans, but then these are the same communities who have been impacted by climate-induced disasters. Those are not considered or just brushed through as one line of the WASH plan. So that will not make any change. So this is where like we agree that if we have the local governments understand the climate risks and they have this negotiating power based on their evidence, I think that's the most strong justification that they could do for the climate resilient WASH, or for them to negotiate on WASH funding avenues from the central government, right? I think that's one of the key points that we are trying to hit into. So the training of trainers, how we are looking at it, it's not just the government. We are engaging other sector players as well. So we have the government team, we have the development partners, we have the INGOs and NGOs participants who have been part of the training of trainers, and we are actually trying to bring them together for us, because as UNICEF or as a government, we are small numbered, right? If you are looking at 753 municipalities where we need to reach out. So we are looking at all the sector players who are trying to do bits and pieces on climate resilient WASH here and there and all those things. So in different ways. So we're trying to look into capacitating the government, but also bringing the principles of climate shifts among the development players also, no? Like we have to bring a single principle for Nepal as a climate shift on the WASH. So where like everybody could contribute as a trainer or as a facilitator or even contributor to run those capacity building programs, no? So we are strategizing in two ways. One is capacitating the government at the local level, but also bringing all the sector players in one go to have a single principles of climate shift. So this is how we thought like the TOT could really help us. And in fact, like very recently, we're trying to even nationalize the training manuals and to make the the context more nationalized, so that the whole idea, the principles of climate shifts, which is developed from the global team or the global context, is now internalized in the Nepal context. And all the solutions and examples that we are looking at on the climate shifts is Nepal based, aside from what we learn from the global side. So we're trying to also nationalize the whole training manual as well.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Arnita. And I don't envy you and the local government, the 753 municipalities with what is ahead, but it sounds like it's a great start, and I'm looking forward to hearing, and I'm sure the sector is, about how it goes when we check in a couple of months' time. I think I'm going to have to go to Uganda next, Arnita, but just say thanks a million. Maybe if in the chat you could just say a few lines about what challenges have been encountered by the government and the sector in this process, that would be fantastic. But thanks so much again, Arnita.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Fiona.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. I think next we're going to, if my slides are removed, I'm going to go to Dr. Callist in Uganda. Dr. Callist, can you hear us?
Yes, I do hear you, Fiona.
Great. Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my slides, so you'll just have to bear with me. So Dr. Callis, I know that you're very, very busy and you're here at Stockholm World Water Week and you've taken this time out of your busy schedule. But I was wondering if you could please share with us, because I think the Uganda experience is really interesting. I know that Uganda is the first country to work on a WASH National Adaptation Plan. And I think that is really inspirational for the whole WASH sector, and particularly I think for countries looking at this as they become more familiar with the NAP process and indeed the NDC process. But if you could maybe just share with us, Dr. Callist, how we have come to this, how Uganda decided to develop a national adaptation plan specifically for the WASH sector. If you could share a couple of points with us, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Fiona. Yes, indeed. Uganda has taken steps to develop a national adaptation plan for WASH. Climate change is affecting Uganda like it affects other countries, and we are seeing the water environment actually manifesting climate change. Too much water resulting in floods, too little water resulting in droughts, and of course the landslides affecting WASH systems. So we have had WASH systems, for example, being washed away, pit latrines being really flooded, and of course then the water getting polluted. We have had in areas where there is a drought, limited amount of water, infrastructure actually not serving the purpose. But climate change is affecting other sectors like WASH, in addition to WASH. So adaptation for Uganda is actually a priority, and we have clearly highlighted this in our national determined contribution. So WASH is very, very clearly highlighted as one of the sectors that we need to actually address. And we are now moving forward to prepare a national adaptation plan. It is now ongoing and is going to provide direction to the country on how we are actually going to improve our resilience to impacts of climate change. So the national adaptation plan is providing national level guidance on how we are going to respond across various sectors. But we did realize that we have had challenges, again, as has been mentioned, that it has been difficult to justify why we actually need to invest in climate resilient WASH services. It has been very difficult to justify the funding from climate change windows. One time we submitted a number of concept notes to Green Climate Fund. 8 of them and all of them were sent back. That actually they were normal development project. There wasn't any climate rationale. So we decided that we need to take advantage of available resources. by undertaking climate vulnerability assessment and also identify the risks WASH systems are faced with. So we have worked very, very closely with UNICEF to undertake the vulnerability assessment. And right now we are developing a national adaptation plan for WASH to be able to provide guidance to the country on how we are going to adapt to impacts of climate change and improve resilience of WASH systems. So that's the motivation we have had, and we feel that this is going to guide us to take collective action, but also enable us to mobilize resources for climate resilient WASH services from within the country and outside.
Great, that sounds great. And Dr. Callis, what is the time frame to have at least the first draft of the WASH NAP for Uganda developed?
We expect it by end of November, December.
Great.
So because really we had a solid base, we did a lot of work, again, thanks to UNICEF. We did a lot of work. We have now been able to really look at the climate shift. We have been able to mobilize the stakeholders. We set up teams that are driving this process. So the National Adaptation Plan for WASH is actually building on a solid base, good work that we have done.
Great.
And that's why we feel that it's going to move very fast. And by around December, we should have the first draft to share.
Well, I'm sure lots of people listening in today will be very curious to have a look at the first draft, but maybe also, if I remember correctly, SIWI and the UNICEF in Uganda and the government of Uganda have put together a knowledge piece on the experience of implementing the climate shift. It's in a draft form, but I think that is just something that I think that would be of interest to the whole sector as well. Maybe Dr. Callis, if I could just ask you what would your one piece of advice be to any other government starting this whole process? What would that be, if you wouldn't mind sharing, please?
Well, number one is we really need to start by undertaking climate vulnerability and risk assessment. You are not going to develop a WASH NAP without understanding how vulnerable WASH systems are, and also looking at the different risks. So number one. But the other thing also is really to put an interdisciplinary sectoral team to drive this process.
Great.
UNICEF has supported us, SIWI has supported us, but this work has actually been driven by a team from within the country, composed of stakeholders in WASH from the civil society, government, private sector, UN agencies. But at the heart of that, the leadership by government. We have led it as a Ministry of Water and Environment. SIWI and UNICEF have supported us, but so the leadership by government, so that it becomes a national priority. That has been key, but also the link to the National Adaptation Plan and NDC, so that as you develop the WASH NAP, it is hinged in NDC, so you have to make sure that the NDC are clear on WASH, but also the National Adaptation Plan, which provides the overall framework, is also very clear, so that when you develop a national NAP for WASH, then it is hinged on those processes.
Yeah. And of course, and I think we do have the deadlines of the end of 2025 for all the NDCs to be updated, and also for the NAP. So that's really great advice. And thanks so much, Dr. Callis. And maybe also just to highlight that the experience from Nepal and Uganda, in addition to another 9 countries, are all part of UNICEF's collaboration with the British government, with FCDO's Global Water Leadership Programme. So we're doing this across 4 different regions. So just to say that we've definitely learned a lot. But maybe if someone could mute, if that's okay, whoever has their mic on in the background. But maybe also to highlight that since August last year, we've also been looking at applying the climate shift in fragile and conflict-affected countries. And I know that we're implementing this also in DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think there's also been looking at conflict in integration with the climate risk assessment. So I think we're looking forward to coming back with an update next year on that progress. And thanks again, Dr. Callis. Maybe before we leave Uganda, just a quick question. We have our colleague Wilberforce here from UNICEF, and maybe just Wilberforce, from a UNICEF or an organizational point of view, what advice would you give to other teams starting this process? If you could just give us what your key learning has been. Thanks. Hi, Wilberforce. So maybe you have to be unmuted. Okay, Wilberforce.
Okay, you can hear me, Fiona?
Yes, perfectly. Yes, thanks so much. Yeah, just if you just give us Wilberforce, your what key advice would you give to another organization starting on this process? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to ride on what Dr. Calist has presented. The first thing is to bring on board all stakeholders from civil society, development partners, the government, different ministries. And the first thing is that the government should take lead, and as partners, we should be facilitators. I think that one helps a lot. The second one is to have different teams, like in Uganda, for instance, we have the steering committee team and then the technical review team of all the outputs which come out from the shift. So the technical review team, they are able to look at the details of the output and so to participate, but the steering committee now gives the overall guidance. And lastly, having a framework is very important, and it is good we are coming up with this guide. Like in Uganda, the UNICEF Global Water Partnership Framework was very key to follow through the processes as you highlighted them, Fiona, from understanding the problem and then identifying and appraising the framework and developing the framework and detailed work plan. So this gives the foundation for bringing everybody on board so that they know the process and the expected outputs and outcomes.
That's brilliant. Thanks a million, Wilberforce, and again, thanks to Dr. Callis. I think we're certainly all looking forward to hearing the next steps for Uganda. And thanks again. And I know you're outside Wilberforce, and it wasn't so easy to connect. And thanks again to the Uganda team. Maybe I can now move on to Jibril from the Water Aid team in Burkina Faso. Jibril, yes, great. First of all, thanks a million, Jibril. When we had a chat at Stockholm, you were telling me about the Water Aid project in terms of integrated water resource management and how Water Aid has been working with communities in terms of groundwater monitoring. Would you be able to tell people about how Water Aid is implementing this program at a community level and what it is doing in terms of ensuring sustainable access to safe water? Please, Jibril. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you all for attending in this session. Very thanks to CIWI, UNICEF to join, to invite Water Aid to join this session. Do you know, before to answer the questions, let me say that information is the power. Information is the power. Everyone know that. But what is the lack of information? That is the question. In our sector, in the sector of water and sanitation, the community didn't access to information. This is our fundamental thinking, and why we built a tools to build a community capacity to collect data, to make decision to manage water resources. Your question is how water proceeds. Yes, we have developed the tools, and these tools is operate the water security approach. And it in the context of Burkina Faso, we implement the policy of integrated water resource management. And this is a link, this approach and the tools and this policy is a very link. And how we proceed? We proceed by make a mobilize the community and engage the community to monitor the resources. We have some tools, and we start by analyze the vulnerability and the capacity of the communities to understand what is the water, what is the link between water and the climate, and we move with the community to have 2 volunteers, 1 man and 1 woman, and we built the capacity of the couple of volunteers. And then we implement some equipment, such as the rain goals, and we have the sensor, the sensor for groundwater measure. Yes, and we support this community to monitor this the resource, groundwater and surface water. And then we also build the community's capacity to hold assemblies, general assemblies in the village.
Wow, okay.
to take a decision, and some of the decision be what to plan the using of the resource on the years, because in Burkina Faso we have two seasons, the rain seasons and the dry season.
Yeah.
Yes, and the water quantity of water is very low in the drought season, and this is a scary situation, and it can make a conflict, easing conflict of water. Yes. And with this process, the community take decision to plan the using of water, to allocate the water point to certain using of water, and we have worked to link the community organization, the system on the community level to the basin level, because on the sub-basin level in Burkina Faso, we have the committee called the Local Water Committee, who is the framework to manage water resource in the sub-basin. And the community share their data with this community, who also share their data to the agencies. We have 5 basin agencies, and these agencies take the database to manage the water resource in their area.
That's fantastic. So maybe to say, but also I know that there's a very strong department of hydrogeology in a university in Burkina Faso. So it's just great to hear that the data is also being used at the national level. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jibril, this is great. And if anyone has any questions for Jibril, please just put them into the chat. I know we just have less than 10 minutes, just over 10 minutes left. I'm going to try and launch a Mentimeter. So we just have a couple of questions, and I was wondering if you could quickly take note of this, please. We're just really looking for your information in terms of to get your feedback on where you find problems in terms of designing climate resilient wash services, the climate financing, the climate rationale. So I'm going to try, and I think the code comes up on one of the slides, so if you'll just bear with me for a second, I'm going to try and launch the code again. Right, okay, so for those of you who, right, I'm going to try and share my slides. Just give me a second, right. Okay. Okay, so if you, hopefully you have been able to read the code or take the scan of the QR code, but if not, the Menti code is 9381120. So we just have a couple of questions. So one of the questions is about, so the first question is, what is your biggest barrier to delivering climate resilient WASH services? Okay, great. Yes, of course, finance is always going to come up as being one of the key ones. Exactly. So just to say that this is really important for us, for your inputs, because this can really help us integrate into the country implementation guide. And I see someone has put in indicators. This is really, really important because, and also to evaluate how effective the solutions have been, but also just to say that I think in November, for the first time ever, indicators in a household survey for the mix, which is the multiple indicator cluster survey, will be included for the first time. So this is just fantastic. So this is just fantastic. This is really, really great. Maybe if I can ask you then to move to the next question, and we have 19. So just to say that we'll continue to look at these responses. This is fantastic. And yes, I see collaboration and fiscal decentralization is coming in. Can I ask, so related to this, of course, is climate finance. And we heard from Dr. Callist in terms of the 8 projects that were sent to GCF, and they didn't have a strong climate rationale. So maybe if we could have your thoughts on what do you consider, because of course we need to have the climate rationale to develop our things together. So in this response, we're not limited to the number of words, so please, and you should be able to put in multiple issues, but absolutely data is one of the key areas that we're having problems with. Exactly. And also just to say that I've looked at many different projects and proposals, and the rationale, often what is in as an activity in the log frame, doesn't actually link to the climate risks that have been included, and often sometimes there isn't even a actual climate risk. Great. So this is really fantastic. Exactly. This is really the nuts and bolts of the problem. And just to highlight that again, we're going to be inputting looking at all of your inputs here, and then looking to see if we have any gaps in our the country implementation guide. I know I just have a few more minutes before Farai is going to jump in. So this is very difficult. So we tried to just guess what we think the 7 key barriers to developing the climate rationale are. And we've heard from Aranita in Nepal that it took 2 to 3 years to get everyone together and to get all the stakeholders involved. So maybe we could just get your feedback on where you think this has been a real challenge in terms of what are the barriers and the biggest challenges to developing the climate rationale. So if you could help us on this, that would be fantastic. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. This is great. This is really great. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think the problem is with the limited interest, there's a lack of an understanding as to why the climate rationale is important. It's really critical, just because it's really the difference between how to program for climate resilience and our standard programming, which of course should be integrated together. But exactly, and just to say that we are about to sign a partnership with the World Meteorological organization, and they'll be working with us in CIWI in terms of making sure that we have the best climate science available and how we can interpret that. But just to say that this is really fantastic, that the limited understanding or even knowing where to start. Okay, I think we just have one more, and I can leave this on while we ask Farai to say a couple of words. But maybe just to say that for us, you know, it'd be really great. We developed the climate shift in May 2020. And I think even now some things have changed. There are new things emerging the whole time. And it'd be really good, you know, to understand, if you remember some of those steps where we're looking at the initial stakeholder consultation and then looking at the available data and then looking at the climate science and then looking at where WASH is included in key national priorities, identification of solutions and environmental social safeguards, climate finance, and then the monitoring and evaluation. It would be really great in terms of, you know, what if we were missing some steps. So I will leave that there. So this is just really great. And also, please just keep on adding in any inputs. I know that we're on a very strict timetable, so I'm just going to hand over to Farai. I hope Farai is there. Farai, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Just
Perfect.
working on getting my video on.
No, sure. Yeah.
Yes.
So Farai, maybe we can just hand over to you to say a couple of closing words. And thanks a million for your flexibility. I know that you're in a million meetings while you're here at Stockholm, but thanks so much.
Yes, this has been quite a great discussion, really pointing out the real challenges on the ground that we are seeing. I'm quite grateful to colleagues who've been able to share their experience. Arinatha, Dr. Kalis from Uganda, Wilberforce, Jabril, and Tom. Your inputs have really been valuable, and I think they all resonate with our realities on the ground as we try to make this transition to climate resilience. We really value the feedback, particularly on Mentimeter. I'm quite mind blown that the interest is actually one of our biggest barriers in terms of moving forward on the climate rationale. And I hope from this webinar, we are able to much more confidently build that interest with the other stakeholders. The country implementation guide is also going to try and demystify some of the challenges we have as we try to build the stakeholder interest, widen interest into the issues of climate resilient water, sanitation, and hygiene beyond our own sector, and really touching the hearts of our colleagues working on climate, Ministry of Finance, in the environmental sector, and even in the water resources management sector, which is still close to us, but is often also forgotten in these conversations that we are doing. So please continue to do the wonderful work that you are doing within the sector, particularly making sure that the WASH teams are involved in the nationally determined contributions, or the NDC processes, the national adaptation processes. We are starting to see a number of forward-looking countries really focusing even on WASH NAPs, because the WASH is seen as front and central for the development of countries, and really enhancing our programming around climate resilient WASH, but of course the correlated benefits for communities. So all this work around pushing WASH up the priority ladder is really, really front and central. Thank you again for taking your time on this session and really sharing your thoughts. And we look forward to continuing to engage with you as we work together in all your countries on climate resilient WASH. Thank you, Fiona, and back to you and the colleagues.
Great, thanks a million, Farai. But maybe just to say also, and thanks to Ricard for putting in the link to the shift. So for those of you who haven't seen it, so this, as we've mentioned, is the essence and the basis of the country implementation guide. And please reach out to us if you have any more thoughts, or you feel there are some gaps. I'll put my email into the chat. It's fward@unicef.org. But if you have any ideas, or if you have any questions which haven't been answered, I know it's been a very, very intensive program. But just want to say, so the shift is in there. Please take the time to have a look at it. We would really welcome your feedback as we finalize the country implementation guide. It would be really great to get your feedback on which areas are not clear, where you need more support, or even on a day-to-day program for climate resilient WASH. So I think our time is just about up. Thanks again to the panelists who have joined under very short notice, for many of you, and thanks to you all who have joined today. I've really enjoyed having a scan through the chat. Thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.